Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. Today, we are going to mostly be focusing on the Senior Bowl, which is ongoing right now. Senior Bowl practices going on throughout this week before the game itself takes place over the weekend. But first, the Super Bowl matchup is set. We've got the Chiefs, we've got the Eagles, round 2. Second time that these two are facing off against each other in just the last 3 years. Mario, your initial thoughts here as the Chiefs open up as 1.5-point favorites after a difficult victory over the Buffalo Bills, whereas the Eagles they really put it on the Washington Commanders. So just quickly, kind of your initial gut feelings about this game. As you know, we get ready. We got 10 days to go, of course. So opinions can change, things can come out. But right now, what are you thinking?
Pretty tough to pick against the Chiefs, but I don't know. This Eagles team is not exactly better than the last one that was in the Super Bowl, but I think the Chiefs team is clearly worse than that Chiefs team the Eagles last lost to. And I do think the Barkley detail really is, momentous. It's not just a bit that we do around here about the running backs being the most important position or whatever. But I'd like to think that in this game it actually might, because guys like Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, although I still don't believe Pacheco is fully, back from his injury. If he's somehow a beat faster in this game, that might be enough. But if the Chiefs need to all of a sudden throw the ball a bunch more, then I'm not sure this is the kind of defense they want to go against to do it. The Eagles are pretty solid 3 corners across the board. Those 2 safeties spend a lot of time giving help to both halves of the field, and they can do that because their run defense, if only because of the defensive tackle personnel, doesn't really need to try to stop the run to be good at stopping the run. So I think this Eagles team is pretty well built to defend the Chiefs. And while, Steve Spagnuolo defense in the playoffs is always a wild card with the odds tilted against the offense, the Eagles, as long as they avoid turnovers, can lean on Barkley and that offensive line, which if you make any defense go against that offensive line in a phone booth enough times, it's going to grind them down. And if Barkley catches the defense with some guy being a half of a second too late to some gap, we've seen what the price of that is to the defense. So with there being, in my opinion, this reduced state with the Chiefs passing game, or at least with the Eagles being well built to stop the big play, I think the best big play in this game is held. First, it's Barkley, and then second, I think you could argue it's AJ Brown before it's anyone else on the Chiefs. So I think if the Chiefs somehow jump out to an early lead and force Jalen Hurts to throw the ball 35 or even 30 maybe times, that's when I think the Eagles, it starts to indicate that the circumstances have kind of like turned against them. But if they just keep giving Barkley the ball, even if there's a couple drives where Barkley gets hit behind the line because a Spagnuolo blitz caught them, stick with it, make those defenders keep facing up and having to defend, having to hold up spatially against that offensive line, because it's a massive offensive line that is very good across the board, and every defense that goes against them is grateful to be done with them. So just subject the defense against what they would least like to see. And I think that's just having to line up directly over Jordan Mailata 35 times. It's probably a bit of a bummer of a task.
Yeah, no doubt there. The Barkley factor is massive. He pretty much clinched them all 3 of their playoff wins so far. Him in the defense. Were you encouraged by the way that Jalen Hurts played in the NFC Championship game, and or was it something where Washington was just so kind of outmatched to where, like, things got away from them and all that? So maybe not too many takeaways from Hurts in that game, but he had kind of struggled for the latter part of the season, plus the first 2 games of the playoffs.
Yeah, I'll always have my ongoing concerns about Hurts as a passer, but he clearly was not as bad as his numbers were going into that game. Those 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it was. It was a pretty brutal stretch there, to the point that even I was kind of like, yeah, it's got to be the knee. Maybe it was the knee. Maybe the knee is improved. Maybe that's the whole pivot point there. But I thought either way, it was like there has to be something wrong with Hurts physically, or he will eventually get it going. And that was not an easy defense to get it going against, in my opinion. I know the Eagles, I think part of it was just because the Eagles playing so great. Washington looked like they made a truly poor defensive showing, where I don't think it was that. I think it was just they got caught on a bad day. I don't think it goes 55 every time those two teams play. But yeah, it was just the Eagles being at their best, and you saw that. I think it was a demonstration of what happens when the Eagles are at their best versus Washington more or less at their best. And it's like this is what happens when the Eagles are at their very best. And when you get into the playoffs, especially later into the playoffs, you generally need just more firepower, and you need real talent. You can't the guy who overachieved for 17 weeks, you have to assume that's over now. You have to assume like he will get exposed in this game, and we need somebody else to make up the difference. And I just don't think there was much that defense could do about it. They just walked into a buzzsaw.
They did, yeah. That the Eagles just put on a clinic, and like that. I think there was certain points of that game where the dam just kind of started breaking for Washington's defense. I think I always come back to that key third down conversion, or maybe it was a fourth down conversion to AJ Brown deep down the field where he beats Lattimore, and it's like, oh boy. Then they score pretty quickly after that, and at that point, you're just kind of in the danger zone if you're Washington. And then Philly just kept capitalizing on the mistakes that Washington's offense was making, and therefore we had just a not overly exciting NFC Championship game. But I think roster wise, this is an Eagles team that is hard to match up against. I think that defensive front that they have is monstrous. I think that the linebackers, yeah, that's been really huge for them. He wasn't even like a great sack artist during his time at Georgia. I think his career high was like 3.5 sacks, something like that. But he was the number one player in his recruiting class. Really good at setting the edge. Like he did other things that didn't necessarily show up on in the box score. So I'm not surprised that he's actually turning out to be pretty good. But him just kind of really reaching his apex form seemingly out of nowhere is pretty wild. You tack that on to Zach Bond being arguably the free agent signing on the defensive side of this year's class. Obviously Saquon Barkley the free agent signing overall on the offensive side. The Eagles are they're loaded, and I think they can win even if Hurts plays just like a B minus game, just because the surrounding talent is that much. It's pretty wild, but I still stop short, kind of like what you're saying of on betting against Patrick Mahomes. I thought that the Chiefs looked interesting and or they looked better last week than they had. I don't know. I go back and forth. I still like it's a measure of history with the Chiefs versus like what we've actually seen on the field. That's why I liked the Bills in that matchup last week. I thought the Bills had a very good chance, obviously, to win that game. And I thought they played well enough to win, but Mahomes and Chiefs magic, just too much for them to overcome. But so at this stage, 10 days away, like my lean is the Chiefs in a close one, but official pick, obviously coming next week when we dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'll say Eagles. I just think this Chiefs team either unveils something that they haven't all year, even though they could have, or they're in trouble. I don't think there's really an in-between.
I think that's a good way to put it. Before we get on over to the meat and potatoes of this episode, we do have a message from our friends over at Edge Boost. Have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? I feel like I have, but TBD. Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits to using Edge Boost. $250K per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cashback on sports betting, DFS, and sweeps. 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming, compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar casinos, horse racing, and sweeps. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Visit edgeboost.bet today and use promo code ROTOPOD. Again, that's promo code ROTOPOD. Check them out over at Edge Boost. We also have a message from our friends over at the Blue Wire Network. And we're on to the Senior Bowl. So, this time of the year, always kind of that weird inflection point between the NFL season reaching its conclusion, but draft season really heating up. We already see Underdog having launched some of its tournaments for NFL 2025 best ball. I'm in a few of those already, so we're seeing guys like Ted McMillan come off the board in like the third, fourth round. Yeah, so we're in early. We didn't even wait for the Super Bowl to start drafting for next year, but I needed the itch. I need to scratch the itch when it comes to drafting. But obviously, the NFL draft itself, and from a fantasy perspective, our dynasty leagues and rookies to monitor. This is where things really kind of start to ramp up, in my opinion. And this year, as anyone who's even kind of loosely follows football analysis knows that this is a pretty terrific running back class. I think that's been well stated. Everyone knows who Ashton Genty is, of course, but he's not at the Senior Bowl. But there are, a decent number of guys that we really do kind of need to keep an eye on, not just this week, but during the combine and the rest of the draft process. So, Mario, you and I have kind of gone ahead and highlighted some of the participants at the Senior Bowl this week. Again, mind you all that not all the best running back prospects in this class are participating this week, but we're going to focus on the guys that are at the Senior Bowl. Let's get things rolling with RJ Harvey, running back out of UCF.
Yeah, so Harvey was a guy that I did not really expect to take that seriously as a prospect, just because I can't remember the last time like Kevin Smith was probably the best UCF running back to come out of there, and he had the injury. I don't think it would have been that great even without the injury, and so I looked at Harvey and his explosive numbers, and I figured, it's just that UCF offense. They're just still at that thing they do where they score a lot of points. But then when you look at the tape with Harvey, who I guess transferred from Virginia, where he was originally, of all things, a quarterback recruit at under 5'9", so you can see why that didn't work out. I'm just surprised Virginia wouldn't welcome him at running back, because any college football team I think could have used RJ Harvey. I think he's pretty convincing film evaluation, and the numbers. Normally, you'd worry about the system with numbers like those with a team like UCF, but I think the film kind of corroborates the production with Harvey, so you can take it more at face value and not so easily attribute it to the UCF system. Because also, RJ Harvey was uniquely productive at running back even by UCF standards. So I would assume it's basically back to Smith and Latavius Murray were the last times that you'd find someone who produced quite around the level that Harvey did. But Harvey's numbers hold up to pretty much all of them, other than Smith, who had that one like 2,400 yard year or whatever it was. So Harvey, it would be great if he ran a surprisingly fast 40, but I don't think he needs to, because the way he wins is with short area elusiveness and sort of the ability to stop and change direction without needing to gather himself. And his even though his speed is not standout, or I'm assuming it's not standout. I assume Harvey runs like a 4.57, 4.58 or something like that. But the quickness with which he reaches his top speed and the decisiveness that he is able to work with as he is doing these, plant, stop, change direction kind of things. And he's really low built to the ground, low anchor, even though he's not a heavy running back, even though he's not exactly powerful. He has that effect where bigger defenders kind of just slip over the top of him because they don't get low enough. So I think Harvey's game can translate at 5'9", 208 or whatever it was he weighed in at. Probably not going to be a workhorse candidate, but if guys like Bucky Irving and Kyron Williams are eligible for 20 carries per game, I don't know why RJ Harvey wouldn't be. I just think it's one of those things like all of those guys are going to have a price to pay at some point. And so I'd still prefer, if I was running a team, I would want RJ Harvey on my team, but I'd want him capped at something like 14 carries per game over the course of the year, something like that.
I like Harvey as well. And I think back to I went on a podcast with an industry friend of ours in the college football realm, Let Purple Rain. He does great stuff in the college fantasy football space. And what we did was kind of a retrospective on our projection process for this year. And looking at RJ Harvey, UCF, like projecting UCF running backs has been kind of a blind spot for me. And I thought there were some contextual things working against him coming into this year. Like they bring in KJ Jefferson, who I envisioned to be kind of like the perfect fit for the Gus Malzahn offense at quarterback. I thought that he was going to eat up a lot of like the rushing workload. And they brought in Penny Boone as well, who had done extremely well at the MAC level, started out at Maryland. So it sort of seemed like there were things there that were going to cap RJ Harvey's ability to exceed what he did in 2023, when I think he ran for like 16 touchdowns, had a really good year. It's hard to like really, with those things in mind, like say, oh no, it's actually going to get a lot better. And, he goes ahead, averages almost 7 yards a carry, over 232 carries, 22 touchdowns. I made myself a little spreadsheet. He was getting like 10-yard runs on almost a quarter of his rushes. So, I mean, really impressive stuff from Harvey. And, he certainly kind of silenced me as a bit of a doubter coming into this past year. And a bit now kind of find myself as a bit of a believer, maybe not as like a top of the top end running back prospect in this class, but someone that in the right system can certainly do some things for us for fantasy.
Right. So these early best ball drafts, I do think Harvey is someone you can draft. I don't think you'd want a ton of exposure. Probably don't want him higher than RB5, something like that on your roster. But I would be pretty shocked if Harvey falls past the 4th round, and I'd also be shocked if he didn't just immediately catch on wherever he went, because I think any team that any offensive coach that watches what happens when you give them the ball, they're going to say like, oh yeah, this is, we can use this.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let's get on over to our next Senior Bowl running back, Devin Neal out of Kansas, who, it feels like he had been at Kansas for forever. Him and Jalen Daniels kind of oversaw the renaissance of Kansas football, not since the days of Todd Reesing has things really been going as well as they have been over at KU. But Neal, monstrous performances throughout his career, and certainly this year, I definitely remember a weekend in which I think when Kansas might have been playing Colorado, where just fully unstoppable. That like he won, or he was in pretty much every winning college football DFS lineup that weekend. Tell us a little bit more about Devin Neal beyond just the occasional monster game at Kansas.
Right. So Neal is not as exciting of a player as RJ Harvey and some of the other notable running backs in this class, but he probably gains in the trade-off steadiness and certainly volume upside. At 215, I think that's what he weighed in at, something like that. This is a guy who took a big workload, certainly the past 2 years, and to the extent you'd call it a workhorse workload. He basically did not leave the field, and every game he'd get the ball a lot, and generally he was very productive. But he doesn't have a whole lot of speed, or at least I assume Neal isn't very fast. I'd expect him to run high 4.5, something like that. But you can see in the way, again, the way he wins at the college level doesn't owe so much to speed anyway. So it would be nice, sure, if Devin Neal were to come out and run a 4.48 or something like that. But if he doesn't, it doesn't change, it doesn't harm what would have been the assumption anyway, which is just, this is a guy who's going to be efficient for you, and he'll get you short yardage, touch goal line carries, stuff like that. He can come through for you, and he'll never really be the reason your team is losing. The only trade-off really is he also probably won't give you like 200-yard games. He probably won't give you even 150-yard games. But if your offense is good and you just need someone to play running back, Neal will probably be an acceptable option for any team in that situation. So you could imagine Neal going in the mid rounds, maybe as far as the 5th. I don't think it's a big red flag if he does, though. It's like we've seen a bunch of guys fall that far or further into day 3 and turn out to be useful in the NFL. But I still expect Neal to go more like the 4th and maybe even the 3rd, I guess, depending on how he tests athletically.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much holding out until we get the testing, but the production, part of his profile is pretty sterling overall, and that's a good, kind of film analysis, role analysis on him as well. Let's grab a couple quick hitters on the rest of some of these running backs. Your thoughts on Damian Martinez out of Florida? Obviously started his first 2 years at Oregon State. I saw like a weird factoid where, he had been listed pretty heavy in his freshman and sophomore years at Oregon State. And even at Miami, they had him at 232, I believe. But he's more of a 225 guy. It's at around 6 foot. He just... I don't know. The production was always good. Like the efficiency, we're talking like 6 yards a carry, pretty much like clockwork for him through his first couple of years, and then takes it up to 6.3 at Miami. But I was surprised that they used him as little as they did. Just 159 carries in 13 games. Although, to be fair, when it comes to Miami's offense, like Cam Ward was doing more than enough to where it's like, why would you really go away from that?
Yeah, and like you said, it's a curious case for all those reasons. It's odd that he is listed as heavy as he is, and then has the yards per carry that he did in all 3 years and at both schools. So it's not the system in either case. It's like, this is the kind of player he is. He's a running back who apparently at least shows up to camp heavy. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he loses the weight quickly in the first couple weeks each time or something like that. But when I watched him without knowing his weight, yeah, I did not have any idea that he'd be listed at 240. I thought he was like 210 or something like that, which is to say he is not, he obviously is more like 225, but he kind of has an upright stance, and it might be fine because he does have that weight underneath, and he does have some anchor with it. So it's not like he's at risk of getting clotheslined the way some other upright runners would. But it's just hard to figure out without the athletic testing, especially. It's like, how did he make those big plays over and over and over? He doesn't look that fast, but it keeps happening. He also doesn't look like that much of a bruiser. It's like he doesn't go play violently or anything. So he will like drive for yards after contact. He'll keep his legs moving and stuff, but at that kind of weight, you expect him to go out there and clobber people, which he didn't. He almost has like a skill. He almost has like a speed back mindset and skill set, but a power back's traits athletically. So it'll be interesting to see whether teams take a liking to him, because sometimes when there's a limited workload, like you said, like he didn't get as many carries as you'd expect, especially given the results he was giving them. Sometimes there's a reason for that, and sometimes it's more innocuous than others. But there's probably some reason Martinez did not get that 20 carry kind of usage at Oregon State or Miami, and it's not that he can't hold up to it, So it's a little bit of a question mark that could turn for the worse, or maybe turn out to be nothing.
Yeah, because in the case of Oregon State, it's not like they had like a ton of like NIL studs, like that would be theoretically taking carries off of his plate. But Miami, again, it's an offense that was going to be centered around the pass this year, and probably wanted to keep Mark Fletcher happy was the other running back in that backfield who was, pretty solid on a per carry basis. So just kind of keep Martinez fresh, I think, is my kind of more generous
That
view
makes sense.
of why, maybe that workload didn't climb as high as you might have thought this year, but, still an intriguing guy. I'm not going to like grade too hard against him from this year, but again, time's going to tell on that one. Indianapolis should go in the combine, should go a little ways towards kind of determining things, shoring things up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Ollie Gordon. I think that he's one of the trickier cases because, we're human. We care most about what happened most recently. This year was not good from Ollie Gordon, but last year was incredible. I mean, he entered the year again like if it's confusing to people to bring the college fantasy angle into this, I apologize, but in fantasy drafts this year it was an open question as to whether Ollie Gordon or Ashton Genty was the number one overall pick in most drafts. Anyone who took Ollie Gordon instead of Genty pretty much sunk themselves in their respective drafts, of course. But how do you kind of weigh out a case like Ollie Gordon, where we've seen the highs be as high as they are, but in a year like this, where there weren't a lot of contextual excuses for things to go the way that they did for Gordon, that we can kind of not necessarily forgive it, but not completely tank his grade, because averaging under 5 yards a carry and for a supposedly blue chip running back prospect is concerning. The workload drops off. Oklahoma State, I think, was like top 5, I want to say, in returning production. So everything should have been working in his favor to have a monster season. Just didn't.
Right. And I think even if you look at it sort of charitably from Gordon's side, you'd still have to concede that the downturn in his production in 2024 did reveal something that was not apparent in 2023. And it might be as simple as defenses adjusted to some look that was working in 2023 and we're cutting it off in 2024. And Oklahoma State just didn't really have the ability to, or did not anyway, adjust for whatever reason. And sometimes it turns out to be, that the team failed the player. I guess that's not completely out of the question here. I mean, Mike Gundy, of all people, was the only person ever who managed to take Tyreek Hill and make him a third down back instead of a good receiver. So not a sterling history as far as putting his players in position to win and do what they're best at. But I'm worried that in Gordon's case, the drop off from 2023 to 2024 was more that teams either targeted more the fact, or just incidentally it came more clear that Gordon needs a little space to get moving. Like, he's not a sudden slashing explosive kind of runner, but he is one of those guys. This is a weird comparison to make because I expect Gordon to get drafted and probably in the first 4 or 5 rounds, but I think you'd almost have to use him in the NFL, or think of him in the NFL as the way you would someone like Garrett Blunt, someone who you just, if you don't clear room for him, his utility on the play is basically that he thuds into some defenders. That's what it is. And if you have a role for a guy to take that task 20 times, and better yet, if your offensive line can create that room for him, he can pick up some steam. And once he gets moving, it's not that fun to defend him. It's once he gets moving is more the theme of his 2023 season. Like, he got moving, and there was all kinds of problems catching him once he got going. But in 2024, you see this theme of just getting bottled up, contained at the line, and he has almost a complete void of quality starts. He has one quality start in 2024 if you remove that South Dakota State week 1 or whatever it was, which not that there's no South Dakota State is a real program. They're not pushovers exactly, but if your best game of the year is against Texas Tech or South Dakota State, then you probably didn't do that well.
Yeah, and that certainly showed in the season long numbers from Gordon. So definitely a a disappointing final season. I wonder, what the draft stock would have looked like if he had just entered last year, but goes back. I expected a lot more, but I'm not ready to completely close the book on him. But I think that LeGarrette Blount comp is an interesting one, if nothing else. We're going to get to Trevor Etienne in a moment, but I did have not necessarily a curveball, because you wrote him up in your article, which everyone should go check out, up on rotowire.com. NFL Draft Senior Bowl standouts. I wanted to get your thoughts on Woody Marks, or Jaquavius Marks, as he was listed during his time at Miss State. Transfers over to USC this year, has a more conventional role, but during his time at Miss State, obviously in those kind of more air raid type of setups, was used heavily in the passing game. Had a couple seasons there with well over 40 catches, topped out in 2021 at 83 catches. My goodness. But then again, goes to USC this past year, has a more conventional running back role, still catches 47 passes, but also runs it almost 200 times for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns in a USC offense that was pretty mid. So checks in at the Senior Bowl with pretty promising height, weight, density boxes to be checked there. 5'10", 215, I think is kind of a frame that you like to start from with the running back. Has displayed some pass catching production, but where is he kind of fit in this puzzle in your mind? Is he someone that should still be kind of on our best ball radar pre-draft, or anything else like that?
I think it's certainly justifiable to consider him, ideally in the last round, I suppose. But wherever he might go, there's a case to make for a guy like Marks. Certainly, I don't know what to expect exactly about the league's reception of him. I think probably, given that Marks is a very fast, very quick, twitchy kind of runner, given that he runs with a lot of aggression, he runs with a good motor, and yet his production was not as explosive as you would hope or expect, even at the collegiate level. I do worry and kind of suspect there's a hitch at some point in his game. Otherwise, probably something to do with processing or vision. Doesn't seem like he lacks balance. He seems like he's all around. Marks is a really, really good athlete. Like any kind of athletic stunt or something there is to do, he's probably good at it. So that will, I guess, understandably get a lot of teams interested off the bat. Like, he should be the fastest running back in this group. I think there might be a chance even that he, I don't know what kind of track demons might be in this class that I'm not aware of, but he might have the fastest 40 of the running back class, not just at the Senior Bowl. Like, he might run something on the mid 4.3s or something like that. And yet, again, the production wasn't as good as someone as fast as him should make it. So there are some plays in his tape where you can see him kind of just, it seems like he's sort of running with horse blinders on. Like, he's moving his feet, he's going as fast as he can, he's running hard, fearlessly, all that, but he doesn't really seem to know where he's going. And so if we're thinking back of a player who had a theme of immense athleticism but just frustratingly lagging returns from scrimmage, someone who you might be able to compare him to would be Jerick McKinnon, something like that. So, and I think if the hitch, if the lag in his, if it's a processing lag, if it's a vision limitation, that kind of stuff becomes less important the better the offense that he goes to is, and the better the offensive line is. Because if you're making, like we saw with McKinnon, it's like he couldn't, find his way out of anything in Minnesota. But you give him that Chiefs field to work with, it's like, oh, no one can stop this guy all of a sudden. And I don't see any reason why Marks would ever hold back an offense that's already well built if he's getting reps.
I see. I think that's a good reasonable comparable for him. So, good landing spot, definitely has the athleticism to kind of be a splash player. But, if he's kind of stuck somewhere where it's not all that inventive on the offensive side, a little bit more clogged, might not end up being so great. Let's get a couple quick hitters on a couple more guys. I want your thoughts on Trevor Etienne out of Georgia by way of Florida, and the two Michigan guys, Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings.
Yeah, so Trevor Etienne is not as good as Travis, and I'm sure a lot of people now are saying like Travis sucks though. But just give it a minute; they'll stop eventually, with God willing. But Trevor is still a good player. He has some of the same themes. Really good at bouncing out. Excuse me, bouncing outside, and when he gets room, when he hits, when he pulls the trigger, really gets moving fast. Uh, a little bit different of an application too. As much as I say that he's not as good as Travis, he is a little bit different, shorter, a little bit more stout, maybe. So there might be some situations where Trevor does a little bit better than Travis. Especially if it's kind of like get low through the small opening. Trevor might be a little better at that, but you don't see the top level speed, and we know it's not there because Trevor would have at the very least produced better in college if he was as athletic as Travis. So I think he's a role player. I think Trevor Etienne he could fall to something like the 5th round because he's sort of like the function that he would give a team is sort of like a high replacement level position. It's probably somewhat easy to find players like Trevor Etienne, but I think he will always do well with the opportunities that he's given. And I think you might see him use sort of the way Gio Bernard was. Somebody like that might be a good comparison where the theme is that he's elusive, probably not a workhorse, probably not that powerful, probably not even that truly fast, but elusive and just, generally adept.
Yeah, I was not blown over by his performance this year at Georgia, and those Florida offenses earlier on in his career. It's like hard to really draw like a ton of conclusions out of. But yeah, I was kind of struck, like you said, about the lack of explosiveness. We'll see if he can grow a mustache the way that Gio Bernard did, of course.
Yeah, and those Michigan guys, one of them's not at the Senior Bowl, unfortunately. I was hoping to hear more about him because I think he's kind of interesting. But Kalel Mullings, who moved from linebacker very late in his career at the 3rd year. So James Conner is an example of a player who moved from linebacker to running back and obviously made a career out of it. But he did it his true freshman year, if I remember right. And it might not have been the plan with Pittsburgh. Somebody might have gotten hurt or something. So admittedly, maybe Mullings would have gotten onto that track sooner if like Michigan had more running back injuries at the time or something like that. But he gained very quickly on Donovan Edwards, who is the guy who was on the video game and who most people probably knew about going into this year. And what happened was Mullings, even though it was his 2nd year at the position, just took the rushing workload from Edwards, pretty much kicked him just aside. Edwards is still interesting as like a gadget guy. Like he throws a really good pass for a running back, for whatever that's worth. And he does look like a receiver to me. Like he just moves and looks more comfortable doing pass catching functions. So I think there's a chance Donovan Edwards just moves the receiver at the NFL level and might even be good at it. But Mullings would have been interesting. I wish he we'll see him at the combine or whatever, but it'll be interesting to see what his specifics are because he has, I think, maybe quite a bit of upside if the right numbers come back.
I do like a linebacker background for a running back. It kind of portends a physical running style. James.
What's
Conner,
worse?
Mm-hmm.
The red flag is if it's like a Kalen Ballage scenario where they try him at running back and then they go, maybe you could be a good pass rusher or something. That would be a bad sign. And with Mullings, it was more like they gave him the shot, and every time they gave him a shot, it was like, oh crap, I guess we should have had him here the whole time.
Yeah, and in Michigan's case, they literally could not throw the ball this past year. So defenses knew every single week what was coming. Mullings still able to produce. Let's grab a couple of wide receivers. Next up, some pass catchers. Let's hit the Iowa State guys. Iowa State maybe not on everyone's national radar, but turned out they did produce Xavier Hutchinson a couple years ago. Of course, we remember Alan Lazard. We didn't have to talk about Hakeem Butler, but Jalen Noel and Jalen Higgins, a couple of guys that they were mainstays on DFS slates this year. And anytime that you did any sort of statistical filtering of how guys are producing on a given slate, those two always stood out. Noel kind of like the more maybe high volume slot type of guys. So valuable in PPR. Higgins more kind of just like a physical beast out there. So how do you delineate between these two? And, and then throughout like the entire class that's over there in Mobile at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I guess it's understandable if people are a little bit Iowa State wideout fatigued at this point. Butler, of course, did not work out. Lazard has been okay. I think Hutchinson still could work as a slot receiver, but when they in Houston try to make him a Nico Collins replacement, he's been quickly revealed as insufficient. So the funny thing is, I think Jaden Higgins might actually be a pretty good. Not that he's nearly as fast, or I'm not expecting anyway him to be as fast as Nico Collins, but in terms of that, the general theme being 6'4", 220-ish receiver who can draw a ton of targets and still give you above baseline, above average efficiency. I think there's reason to think Higgins is that guy, and if he is, I think he might be surprisingly close to a category of receiver in terms of traits and abilities as someone like Drake London, who I'm a big fan of. So admittedly, Higgins is probably not as quite as athletic, and I don't think his production, even though Higgins' Iowa State production was great, it still probably wasn't as good as what we would the value we'd assign to Drake London's USC production, because Drake London, he was turned 18 barely before the season started, is on the basketball team too, and he's putting up like 500 yards in a receiver group that has like 25-year-old Tyler Vaughn's, Michael Pittman, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's like, okay, yeah, that's a little different when you do that. Higgins was at Norfolk State initially, and he was a good player there, but it's kind of like there's sort of just a question mark, and you can only do so much real determination there. It's mostly just speculation that you do when you try to go into those areas, I think. But what's definite is, as good as Higgins might be, definitely Jalen Noel is some version of good, some form of good. I don't even really know, especially if he tested a certain way, I don't even really know how you'd really bash the idea of Noel going in the first round. I think Higgins might. I'm assuming more likely it's round 2 for Higgins, and Noel maybe 3 or 4. I don't know, but I think he might test pretty well. I mean, the acceleration is clearly very good, and I think Noel might run a low 4.4 or something like that. And at that point, you almost might think of him, you might almost apply him to an offense the way you would like Golden Tate or something like that. And I bring him up because it's an example of, even though it's a trait set that people mostly assume is in the slot, at 5'10", Noel will probably get dismissed by a lot of people as like a slot receiver, but he has boundary level speed, I think, or he might anyway. And if he does, that, like Christian Kirk would be another player in this category. It's like they're at their best in the slot, perhaps, but they don't need to truly always play in the slot. They can play outside if it must come to that. So I could see Noel and Higgins both being pretty high picks, especially if they can go into the combine and do more to help their stock there.
They certainly seem to be, helping it this week. This is just one data point in the whole pre-draft process, but all reporting I feel like has been pretty solid as far as their reviews are concerned. Tell us about a guy who's maybe a little bit more under the radar coming out of Utah State, but Jalen Royals.
Yeah, so this is a tough one. There's a lot of ways players with Royals' kind of set of traits and production details, it can go different ways, especially pending the athletic testing. Like some guys produce like Royals did at the whatever Western Athletic, Mountain West, whatever version of this kind of player you think of. But a lot of the times the testing quickly reveals the player for just being a great college receiver, but not likely one to transfer to the NFL. Royals might be one of those guys where he does test athletically more like the way you would expect an SEC school receiver to test. And if he does have above average athleticism, to go with a very stocky frame. Like, he doesn't exactly look stocky on the field, but he weighed in at 210 at 5'11", which it's unusually stocky. But it didn't hinder his movement at all. It seemed like Utah State used him a variety of ways. So it wasn't just outside or in the slot. It was more they would design plays to go to Royals because he was always their best option, and no matter what the setup was, he would pretty much vindicate that assumption there. So we wait to see now, I guess, how he finishes out Senior Bowl week, how he does at the combine, and how the league receives him. A best case scenario with a guy with this kind of production profile at this level of competition, you could raise Devontae Adams as an example of. So I guess I should mention Royals had 1,914 yards on 182 targets in the last 20 games. So that second year being a sophomore year. That was his third year. So my bad. But it's one of those things like Royals is checking all the boxes so far, and with flying colors or whatever you would want to say, and now we kind of wait to see, like, is he going to settle into that mid round range where those otherwise encouraging prospects who still have some kind of lack of clarity or other limiting concern in their game, is he going to go there, or is he going to end up pushing more conclusively for day two? And I think there's reason to hope or even expect that it's the second thing, that like maybe we can say Royals shouldn't fall past the third and could go in the second.
He's certainly one to watch. He certainly had an interesting and productive career, but got to see how it plays up coming out of the Mountain West. And lastly, as you've been digging into this class, I think a lot of people know who Tyler Warren is and Colson Loveland out of Penn State and Michigan, respectively, who kind of headlined this tight end class. But unlike last year, where it was Bowers, and then you had to kind of squint to really find that next guy, this class might offer some more depth in that regard.
Yeah, it's funny. There's at least one tight end in this Senior Bowl class, Thomas Fidone with Nebraska, who a lot of people actually ranked ahead of Bowers in that tight end class, which aged horribly, of course. And
yeah,
Fidone's not even one of the ones. He should be athletic. He should test well athletically, but I don't think he's one of the ones that I'm going to get my hopes up too high for. The most interesting one, in my opinion, the one kind of most worth rooting for, is Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, who he's it was 238, I think he weighed in at 6'3". He's not going to fool anyone. Like, he's not really playing inline tight end at the NFL level. If he's lining up at tight end, it's probably the second tight end, like the outermost tight end in a lopsided formation. More realistically, the way that Fannin would translate to the NFL level is as a big slot receiver, and one you might call a tight end. Sure, who cares? And maybe he is more a tight end than a receiver, but his production at Bowling Green was such that you can tell there's something a little bit different about him. You can say safely, Harold Fannin is a much better natural pass catcher than most tight ends at the college football level, going back a long number of years if you want. But we don't really know, does he have the athletic traits, the physical traits necessary for those skill set details to materialize at the NFL level? Like, maybe he's some combination of too small, too slow. Maybe he's not strong enough at this or that. But at the college level, he was under immense exposure as a route runner. 156 targets last year in 13 games. Plenty busy the year before that. He had 623 yards, 6 touchdowns on 62 targets in 2023 in only 11 games. So like in the so-called down year between the two, Fannin still would easily be on a 1,000-yard pace in an NFL season. So, but with the 2024 numbers, 1,555 yards and 10 touchdowns on 156 targets. The defense knew it was going to him, and they couldn't really do anything about it. And I'm hopeful that Fannin, A, does well this week, and B, tests well at the combine, because if he has the wheels, if he can jump and do everything, then the skill set is there. And if he has to play in the slot, if he really has to be a fake tight end about it and pretty much only play the slot, then if he has sufficient athleticism, he can kind of force an NFL team to give him that role, even if it's unorthodox, even if he's weird, because it's like the results are there.
Yeah, I mean, I watched him plenty this year, but did you watch his bowl game against Arkansas State?
No, I'm familiar with the numbers, but I did not see the 17 catches.
Yep, 17 for 213. Yeah, that's how you want to go out. I don't blame anyone for opting out, but it's cool to see someone like just absolutely pop off in their last game in a bowl game. Is there anyone that kind of comes to mind for you as a comparable, as someone who, probably too small to play a conventional tight end, but production leads us to believe is maybe too skilled to just completely not make it?
I wish I had thought about this more. It's possible there's no real case like him going back a long ways. It is possible there is someone. If there is someone in the NFL level who had a Fannin type case as a prospect and it worked out well, I think it was probably the case that they just ended up blending in at tight end. Like they probably weren't ever great, but they probably added like 8 pounds over the course of their career, and people eventually kind of stopped bugging them about being too small or whatever. But I don't know. There's some role, I think, for Fannin, and if you have to call him a receiver who pretty much only plays in the slot, it's like there's a ton of those guys in the NFL already. Admittedly, it would be bad for Fannin's fantasy prospects to get reclassified as a receiver. We like that lower bar at tight end for fantasy scoring. But really quickly, I think the guy who has the higher floor and the one who's definitely going to go ahead of Fannin, be the first tight end drafted from this group, is Mason Taylor, son of Jason Taylor. And as a true freshman, Mason Taylor became a 3-down player for LSU. You can find clips of Brian Kelly just like crying, saying these just wonderful things about him, how great he is. So between being having the NFL roots, the bloodlines, having coach culture, the team, the LSU team going to bat for him, I think Mason Taylor actually has a chance to end up in the first round. It's just he's more like a complete tight end, and it wouldn't necessarily be as interesting in fantasy as Fannin would if Fannin could come through as like a day 2 pick.
Well, I think that's useful for us, if nothing else. We love our draft betting. We love draft over unders, and Taylor could be a guy who's moving his stock upward here, but not only in Mobile, but once we get to the combine as well. But I think that's a pretty good primer on the skill position guys that were participating at the Senior Bowl this year. A lot of pass rushers also that are really kind of making names for themselves this week. So I'm getting pumped. I'm feeling it in my bones. It's time to really dig in on the draft, and that this was a good breakdown from you, Mario, on some guys who are of some interest that require a little bit further evaluation as we really kind of kickstart draft season. But that's going to do it for us here over on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, big thanks to our sponsors over at Edge Boost and over on the Blue Wire Network. Mario and I will be back next week with our Super Bowl preview. That's going to do it for us here. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.